A very good evening and welcome to this edition of the Fourth Estate. Charles Mwangu Shampagi. Let me start with a disclaimer, an announcement. I have fired all my colleagues. All the journalists are not in studio tonight, but we have two officials, one from the office of the Directorate of Public Prosecutions and another from the Auditor General. I'll be talking about the Anti-Corruption Day, an Anti-Corruption Week, looking from the perspective of government, where we discover that now the campaign is on against stopping syndicate corruption. It's such an evolution to find that corruption is running through syndicates now, which I think is a phenomenon we hadn't seen before, in spite of all the multiplicity of efforts that have been undertaken to try and roll back corruption in this country. Let me introduce maybe a very, very familiar face to many of our viewers, Jane Okuo-Kajuga, who is a Senior Principal State Attorney, spokesperson for the Directorate of Public Prosecution. Jane, very nice to have you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Tonight. Thank you so much.
We also have from the Office of the Auditor General, the Assistant Auditor General in charge of corporate audit. Would that be correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Mr. Francis Masubo. Francis, very nice to have you.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
When I'm dealing with government officials, especially frontline agencies that deal with the fight against corruption, and especially if you have the Auditor General on one side and you have the Directorate of Public Prosecutions, the question that you would want to ask at the beginning, Jane, do you feel that the multiplicity of agencies actually helps in the fight against corruption, especially, as you say, by the theme of this year's Anti-Corruption Day, that corruption has not only evolved in its magnitude, but actually even in the execution, which is syndicates.
Yes, Charles. I do think that the multiplicity of agencies that has been involved in the fight against corruption is making great progress. Under the IAF, which is the Interagency Forum for Corruption, the Directorate of Ethics and Integrity.
And that's a Ghanaian agency?
Yes, it is. The Directorate of Ethics and Integrity drives the political leadership for the fight against corruption and brings together different institutions from the justice law and order sector and also from the accountability sector. I'm here from the justice law and order sector, and my colleague is from the accountability sector. But it is an acknowledgement of the fact that not only one institution can fight corruption adequately, and that there are different forms in which grand acts of corruption take place, and that where the Auditor General has his function, that the exercise of his function should be able to complement the exercise of the function, for example, of PPDA,
which is procurement,
which is procurement, because this is about the chain of public finance management. It should also be able to complement the activities of the Inspectorate of Government at the investigative level or at the prosecutorial level, and the same thing for the Directorate of Public Prosecution. So we need, we do need these synergies, and we have found actually that the closer we work, the more we understand each other, the more we understand what we are faced with, the better the result.
Yes, the dragnet might be a good idea, but the question is results. The Auditor General will, I'll be asking in a moment.
Yes.
They have evolved and from doing generalized audits to doing very specialized audits.
Yes.
And the question is, when you look at Ugandan taxpayer resources or resources in this country available to government to provide services, vis-a-vis the agencies that you're talking about, do you find that we are losing less money to corruption, or are you losing more money to corruption?
It's a tricky question. One, we have made progress in that we have been able to, working together, to not only prosecute, but to try and recover monies that have been lost through corruption. This has been done through the asset recovery process, which is conviction-based. Once you go to court, you prosecute, and there are orders of compensation that are made, or we are able to seize assets and be able to recover something.
Have you seized any assets lately?
Yes, we have, especially in respect of the investigations in the public service. We do have a lot of properties that we have frozen, and one of the cases is back in court. And because of the fact that our asset recovery is conviction-based, until the case comes to an end, we cannot.
Yes, freezing is completely different from
yes, but
seizure.
it is it's one of the steps
well,
that you need
seizure
to.
and freeze are closely related, but actually turning those into properties that come back to the public fold and that help or lead to recovery of public resources is completely another thing. It is another thing, but it is one of the steps that you have to take. Because if I'm to prosecute persons for example, theft of 20 billion shillings, I have been able, if I do not freeze the assets and get orders from court, identify the assets first of all, freeze them so that we have them where we want them until the end of the trial process. If we don't do that, we will end up with a conviction and an order for compensation that we cannot enforce. That's making an assumption you end up with a conviction, actually. Of course. Yes, and if you don't end up with a conviction, you compensate. No, if we don't end up with a conviction, we cannot do any asset recovery. Yes, you can't do asset recovery, but if you freeze my assets, you freeze my money in the bank, you freeze my my buildings or my other properties, and I am declared free by court, you compensate me. No, we don't. Why not? Because the freezing process is a process that is done by the courts. It's not done by the prosecutory agencies by themselves in an arbitrary manner. It means that we go to court, we are able to identify and tell the court that we have seen these premises, we have seen these assets, we have seen this machinery, and we have frozen them. But at the same time, not only have we frozen these assets, but we can connect them. We can connect them. You can connect them. Yes. You can connect them, and there is something that if I am declared innocent, then I'll claim general and special damages from you if I choose to take you on after I have been declared innocent. I would. You'd be free to try, but I don't know that you would succeed because these are done on the basis of court orders and because of the fact that all we need to prove under the law for us to seize and to freeze your property at that point is suspicion, reasonable suspicion that this is a proceed of crime. And are you able to give me some numbers on what you have seized so far or frozen? Well, I can't give you numbers on that, especially because the pensions cases, I mean the public service case, which we have done a lot of seizures, is still in the court process. I think it would not be proper for me to talk about that. But what I can say is that we have been able to get recoveries where compensation orders have been issued and at the end of a conviction. And the court says you must not only serve 3 years but also pay back this amount of money. Several persons have complied and we have been able to recover. We'll come back to that in a moment because I know what one of the judges called chicken thieves. No, small fish when the crocodiles are still swimming in the waters. Let me turn to Francis for a moment. Francis, the Office of the Auditor General, admittedly, some people would say for academic purposes, you're producing a lot of fantastic reports. Yes. But you're largely doing post-mortem, and after doing the post-mortem, people ask and say, to what effect?
Yeah, thank you, Charles. Auditing by its nature, we come in after the event. So we audit after the money has been spent. But there are also instances when we come in before all the money is spent. Take a case of roads. These days we've got a unit which carries out specialized audits, and they actually audit as the project progresses, and they are able to save some money. What is going on in UNRWA, the investigation which is going on in UNRWA, shows it gives you examples of where audits have been conducted when the program or the projects are still ongoing. But in most cases, we audit after the event. And of course, we have agencies also which are supposed to take over. We have got Parliament to whom we report, and we expect that once our reports get to Parliament, Parliament will follow them up and bring the people who have misappropriated money to account.
Can you describe for me from your audits and what you're finding, especially what you're calling now the syndicate corruption or syndicated corruption? In one of his books, Chinua Achebe says, since man has learned to shoot without missing, I have learned to fly without patching. Yes, and the question is, the corrupt are moving a step ahead of you, the agencies. You're trying to do the inter-agency action. You coordinate your activities.
Yes.
Audit functions feeding into prosecution, feeding into police investigation. I'll come back to Jen Kajuga, and because we have a glaring case that dumbfounded almost everybody on this same thing, the public service pension scam,
yes,
whereby you have 2 reports coming to you, you have a bungled up investigations process, and it leads to a difficult prosecution process, and everybody is looking at you and saying, yes, for once you have been able to keep some of the people who might appear to be big fish in detention, but the faith that you'll actually achieve a conviction out of that and the recovery of the money is lost is a completely different thing. So how does this syndicate corruption work from what you're finding?
Oh, well, thank you. Our finding is that you have many players. You have many agencies, high-profile officers in different agencies. And I can give you an example of the OPM. The OPM...
OPM is Office of the Prime Minister.
Office of the Prime Minister. That where we reported loss of about 50 billion shillings. And that was donor funds. You get officers in the office of the OPM, office of the Prime Minister, colluding with the officers, some of the officers in Ministry of Finance, and officers in the Bank of Uganda, and even the public, where the suppliers, people were purported to have supplied service, were involved. So you have a network of people, and they're creating a syndicate to siphon off government funds.
And what's the extent of the recovery? I know that government of Uganda put the money back because the donors demanded that it gets put back. Yes. But to an ordinary Ugandan in northern Uganda who was either supposed to be a beneficiary or who actually is the taxpayer contributing back the money that was paid back, it's a zero-sum game, isn't it?
I think some money was recovered.
From individuals?
From individuals.
About how much?
I can't put a figure to how much was recovered, but money was recovered, and I think some of the cases are still ongoing in courts.
Francis, do you feel sometimes frustrated by your work?
I wouldn't say frustrated, because one, I think government has supported the Office of the Auditor General, first of all. I think I must thank government. You can see since 2008, government has supported us. It has revamped the Office of the Auditor General.
You have a beautiful building where you operate from.
Yes, and that is the support that we've got from government. And the problem that we have is that we work with other agencies. Our report goes to Parliament. And I think the problem is that you cannot support only the Office of the Auditor General, but you also need support the other agencies that are involved in the fight. And what we have done on the Office of the Auditor General is we know that Parliament, which is supposed to discuss our reports, has also its own challenges. And therefore what we have done is we've got a liaison office. We've got officers attached to Parliament who help parliamentarians to discuss, take them through our reports so that they are able to discuss them. And also in the course of the discussion to help them. We also have awareness programs where we support the members of Parliament, especially the new members.
You have layers upon layers of people or institutions or agencies that are supposed to intervene.
Yes.
But I'm interested more in the numbers. At the end of the day, you do not see Uganda's ranking on the corruption index improving, not only in the East African region, but globally. The Transparency International is releasing a report, and Uganda is scoring in those numbers perennially. You meet people on the street, and the misery continues from when you started to where you are today. And you say, yes, the thieves have evolved into
syndicates.
Syndicates.
Yes.
what you're responding with as government is to network agencies. So you have layers and layers that actually, in terms of impact, the question I'd put to you, Mr. Masubo, is you do an audit.
Yes.
You find all this information. You find all this evidence. Before that Okumugwenge judgment that stops you from pointing fingers and saying exactly this is what happened. They say, no, you audit and say, this is what we think, don't draw conclusions, isn't it?
Yes.
Don't put opinion in what in your audit report.
Yes, don't be judicial.
Yes, don't be judicial. Don't you find that frustrating?
It is, but as I was pointing out, I think some of the issues which come out is you cannot say that corruption itself is increasing as such, because we don't have a baseline where we have measured.
How can you not say that?
You know, but some of the issues that come out is also a result of awareness. There's also a lot coming out in the open. Previously, a lot of things were not.
We'll investigate that. We'll interrogate that after a short commercial break. We'll be right back. You're still watching The Fourth Estate, and like I said earlier, my colleagues on a Peter community somewhere in a Salatap village, somewhere in Amuria, not able to join us tonight, and the other colleagues are not able to join us. I think the excitement of hosting the Pope over the last weekend and events previously have kept them away. I also don't know if it is the celebration of the Crown success in Addis Ababa yesterday. But I have from the office of the Auditor General, the Assistant Auditor General in charge of corporate audits, Francis Masubo, and I have from the Office of the Directorate of Public Prosecutions, Senior Principal State Attorney, spokesperson for the Directorate, Jane Okuo Kajuga. And Jane, let me come back to you.
Yes, please.
We're discussing just before you came on air the success of investigations, especially at the prosecutorial level, where someone is jailed, where someone is made to pay back, where even someone who expects that this service should have come to them gets a feeling like something is being done. And I referred to a judgment which was in respect of the Global Fund, where the judge said, I am tired of prosecuting, of convicting small fish when crocodiles are still swimming in the waters. And the question is, if you look back at major scandals, I don't know if in your office you still have something called scandal in relation to corruption. Do you have something like that?
Yes, we do.
I work in the media, and I spent a lot of time working at the Daily Monitor, and would produce all these stories about corruption until it came such a level where a story about corruption only returns what in media language they call returns. The newspapers they are sent to the market, they are brought back, and they are either sent for sold for as waste paper, because the public no longer gets shocked. They no longer get shocked, because if I reflect back on some of your key successes as the Office of the Directorate of Public Prosecutions in relation to corruption, you have Global Fund. The biggest convict you managed to get was a former journalist called Teddy Says Cheye. How much was his biggest, how much of all the billions that were lost during Global Fund? 120 million shillings? Convicted to 10 years? Ordered to pay back the 100 million shillings? The second person, another miserable gentleman called Fred Kavuma, who was working with the Uganda Broadcasting Corporation, UBC. Small fish, Mukene, if you put it that way. Who are the others? The Ngorano women, the two of them. How much is their total haul? You say you have managed to get back some recovery.
Yes, we have.
Which was the other major conviction you got? You got a conviction in respect of, maybe that was somewhat medium-sized fish, you'd call it, the former managing director of NSSF, David Chandi Jamwa. But David Chandi Jamwa went kicking and screaming to prison, saying, no, you're picking out the wrong party. The actual people who drove this scandal are still out there. And you can look at the whole spectrum and you ask yourself and say, yes, corruption has evolved into a syndicate kind of thing. We shout about it in media. Does it make sense? Creating more awareness. Does it make sense when Uganda continues to lose more money to corruption than it lost in 2013, 2014? We lost less compared to what when your final, when they come out with the final audits, what will be indicated as having been lost in 2014, 2015.
Yes.
It's much bigger than what was lost in 2012, 2013, 2011, 2012. You can go backwards.
Charles, I think when you look at the cases, for example, for Global Fund, it's easy to pick out and say the ones that came out in the public, Teddy Cheye, Elizabeth Ngororano, Stephen Kavuma, Fred Kavuma,
Fred Kavuma.
Yes. We had some other convictions and some other recoveries under Global Fund. But the approach that we took for Global Fund was multi-pronged, if I could say so. We looked, there was the emphasis not only on prosecution, but on recovery of the funds. And I want to state clearly that when money was dispersed by the monitoring unit at that time, the management unit that dispersed it, companies that were subcontracted to do the jobs, like for example the one held by Cheye, the one Valued Health for Ngororano and the rest, they came and they submitted and said we can help you do the activities on behalf of government in terms of tuberculosis, malaria control and all that kind of stuff. So the biggest money actually went to these companies, not to the ministers. So certainly we would not have a minister to prosecute in that case. When we look at how much money went to Valued Health, how much money, let me finish this, how much money went to Valued Health, how much money went to Cheye's company, for example, we were looking at, was this money put to the use that it was supposed to have been put?
What did you find? Was it?
In many cases, no. But again, as I said, they were mixed. We had a multi-pronged approach because in some of the cases you would find that the companies did 60% of the work and 40% was not done. Sometimes you'd find they had what you'd call ineligible expenses, which do not actually amount to fraud within the sense that you would manage to prosecute in a court of law. So what the directorate did was to sit the different teams that were working, and we were working together with Office of Auditor General and CID under what we call the prosecution-led investigations. And I think that's why that was successful. So we sat down and said, in each case, what is the benefit of prosecuting? If, for example, we assigned to your company, they got 70 million shillings to do activities. Out of that 70, we've gone on the ground, we've established that actually they spent 50 million to do activities and 20 million somehow in eligible expenses they paid for things they were not supposed to have paid within the contract. That does not really constitute fraud. Why don't
you get a report? Why don't you get a report that says the estimate for the total amount of money lost in Global Fund initially was this.
Yes.
Our audit from Auditor General,
yes,
Office of the Inspectorate of Government, the IGG, we find that actually not all that money was lost. What was lost is actually this, and this is what we have been able to recover, so that it makes some sense. But if you tell me that the companies that were hired, anybody, even the uninitiated, will know that that is how corruption is wired. You're talking about syndicates? Syndicates of corruption work from Southern America, the drug dealers of Southern America, dealing with agents in Asia who clean up the money through maybe what is heaven in Switzerland, and then money ending up here. I mean, that's as plain as it can be.
Yes, but Charles, the question of big fish, crocodile, people have taken it from different angles. At the directorate, we've asked ourselves this, that if you go to a local government and find that there is acts of corruption, who is the big fish at the local government level? Is it the CFO, the big fish? For example, if he has been involved. So that's what we are saying, that the big fish, for me, is a relative issue. Because
really?
Depending on the setup, yes, depending on the setup where we go.
Anybody who dips a hook into water and feels it having caught something would tell even before they lift it out whether they have a big fish or they have small fish. If they really have big fish, they call other fishermen and say, help, I think I have something big here. And you, in the Office of the Directorate of Public Prosecution, would surely know if you have landed on something big. And when you land on something big and it unhooks itself somehow and swims back into the water, you would know.
Charles, do you consider Kazinda, for example, a big fish?
I don't know.
That is why I'm throwing it back to you.
Is Kazinda big fish?
You tell me what you think. Because as far as, that's what I'm telling you, that within the setup, are we looking at how much money the person has stolen? Are we looking at the position of influence within the setup where this fraud has occurred? You understand? So if there is no minister at the local level, I cannot arrest a minister. But I also want to state,
it doesn't have to be a political leader. Yes, because we need to interrogate whether it's actually the political leaders or the technical leaders, because there's that ping pong between the political and the technical wing, who facilitates corruption the most, who actually is the biggest beneficiary of corruption. Are you able to find those answers from what you've been finding? Is it the private sector?
We work on evidence. And where the evidence trail leads us, that is the person we will catch. And that is the person that we will prosecute.
And the verdict out there in the public is that actually the biggest weakness is not the audits that Masubo and his team are involved in. The weakness is on tracking the evidence trail. That's where either people get corrupted in the process of investigating the corrupt. That is where evidence gets lost. We saw this in public service. The pension scam.
Yes.
The different reports, so you don't know which report have you taken to court, which one are you actually going to base on, and then you get thrown out. And then you say, come back and gather the evidence, you call a situation room. I'm told that your office, now you have a situation room, where you bring everybody, put them in a basement, and say, remove phones, remove everything, no one can walk out with anything, to make sure that by the time you walk out, you have actually narrowed down, narrowed down on the people you actually need to convict. But the weakness is at investigation, it is at prosecution.
I think that certainly the investigative arms have a great impact on the outcome of a case. And that's the reason why, at the Directorate, we took on, from the outset, as far as corruption cases were concerned, and now we are pulling this actually for even other cases that are high profile. We are saying, let an attorney immediately, there is a case, let an attorney guide the investigations. So that the evidence that the detectives get is admissible, it's reliable, and we can actually use it in a court of law. That is something that we have taken up, and that's something that has helped us improve our conviction rate as far as corruption. We
look at the numbers. We look at the numbers in a moment. Let me turn to Masubo in a moment. Mr. Masubo, you're producing an average a dozen reports in a year?
Value for money.
Yes, value for money audits?
Yes.
A dozen reports?
Yes.
In 6 years, my mathematics is not very good. In 7 years, you have about 80 reports?
Yes.
And you carry a truckload of reports and take them to Parliament?
Yes, that's so.
You have value for money audits. You have the General Auditor General's report, the traditional Auditor General's report that you take to Parliament. You do this twice a year?
Once a year.
Once a year, you're taking in 2 reports. Once a year, taking in 1 report. You have the forensic audits that you do for specific cases.
Yes.
You have the IGG complementing you and taking in reports. You have reports upon reports.
Yes.
Parliament, the Parliamentary Public Accounts Committee is producing reports from your audits from the IGG. Local Government Accounts Committee is producing reports. You have the COSASE.
Yes.
Producing reports. Reports upon reports. What do we see? Value for money? You see a construction and say, well, value for money was an audit done here. Exactly. Do these things. What's your finding?
Okay, let me first comment on the question that you asked about the big and small fish. And the problem about big and small is it is the small people who really sign the documents, and those are the people who can commit where she talks about the audit trail. Those are people whom you are likely to find. The big people do not participate in signing documents and the accountability process. And that's why I think many times people expect ministers and so on to be seen, but they don't sign. They don't sign documents. So
they're smart enough.
Well, because the process it does not require them to sign documents, and that's where you'll get procurement officers, accountants, and so on. These are the people who sign, and these are the people whom you are likely to find.
Let me just because I'm told by production that we need to take a quick break. But let me just ask a question. Where is the balance? Because we hear a lot of this ping pong between the political leaders and the technical leaders. Of course, what appears to be like the big fish are the political heads of institutions, who head policy direction.
Yes.
But they complain and say they are manipulated by the technical people because the technical people know the ins and outs. I am told when a minister is appointed to a new office and goes in with what in local lingua will be called kasigiri, and people will say, you'll calm down after a few days. They know how to sort those people out. I think it's yesterday that the president announced he was making some reshuffles of permanent secretaries between the political and the technical. Where is the most corruption?
Well, it is difficult. I wouldn't want to commit. But maybe it is at both levels, because like I said, the reason why you are able to see the small people is because they are the people who sign the documents. But I cannot rule out also the political, putting pressure, influence. I've seen sometimes cheats papers signed by a minister to an executive, and in the course of audit sometimes you are given this information that yes, I acted on instruction. I acted on instruction, and this is the evidence is here. So and that's the only thing that you can see. Otherwise, the actual signing of the papers committing expenditure are not signed by the big people. Let's interrogate the political will after a short commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to this last segment of the Fourth Estate, a kind of special edition because I am alone here. I don't have my colleagues from the media fraternity. I have officials from Jen Okuwa-Kajuga from the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions and Francis Masubo from the Auditor General. And we're discussing corruption ahead of the International Anti-Corruption Day 2015, which is on the theme, Stop Syndicate Corruption for Better Service Delivery. I know there are efforts, some of them collaborated, between the government agencies, the anti-corruption agencies in government, and those in civil society, because civil society has a whole range of activities that will be starting, I think, tomorrow. They have the anti-corruption. The Action Aid has been running, I think, for the second year now, or for the second, this is the second leg of what they call the anti-corruption caravan, which has been moving across the country trying to sensitize Ugandans to join the fight against corruption at an individual level. I know there are other initiatives which will be having presentations and discussions how civil society is fighting corruption to try and draw in as many people as possible in this struggle. The big question is, perennially it's been asked, and coming now when we are running a campaign for ahead of an election, a general election next year, where we'll have a new government, not in terms of new people, but in terms of a new mandate for whoever will be elected. The question of political will. I have listened to some of the campaigns, almost all of them, all the 8 presidential tickets are talking about corruption being key in the fight. But we step back and ask, is there political will to fight corruption? Have you found evidence of political will to fight corruption? And please don't tell me that, you know, we have this agency, we have the other agency, we have this law and the other law. Yes, cosmetically that looks like political will. But in terms of following through, facilitating, enforcing, is there political will? Okay, thank you. I said earlier on, I think the support that has come our way as the Office of the Auditor General is an indication that there's a will from government, and we are one of the agencies, anti-corruption agencies, that supporting this the fight against corruption. But as I said also, the support, you don't have to look at only one agency. It's supposed to be, it should be across all agencies. All agencies should be supported. And I don't know what the support that is going into.
What do you mean when you talk about support?
Well, the support in terms of facilitation, the budgets, our budgets have progressively increased over the years. Talking from the point of view of the Office of the Auditor General, I think the independence has been enhanced, and I can talk authoritatively that I think in terms of our work, we've been progressively being more effective in our audits.
What's the processing rate of your reports?
Our reports are up to date.
No, through Parliament.
Parliament,
once we have handed them over to Parliament.
Parliament is where we have a challenge. Our reports are not moving as fast as they should be processed. And I said, I don't know whether it's a problem of capacity. We are supporting them. We've got an office there. We've got 3 officers who support them. We also run awareness programs. We've, not only in Parliament, even in the local governments, we go down there and support the local authorities. At one point, our reports were not even reaching the councils. They would be hidden in the drawers by either the cows and the chairman. But now we've gone down there and we tried to get the reports to be received and discussed by the accounts committees of the local governments. So it's a process, I think.
Well, if you have one big collection of political leaders,
yes,
in this country, the single biggest collection of political leaders is at Parliament. And at Parliament, if you want something frustrated, and without having someone from Parliament here, my colleague Chris Obore, who is now Director of Communication and Public Service at Parliament, would have been good to discuss, or maybe we'll have an opportunity to have him come and discuss from their perspective as Parliament. But you have at Parliament, if the report manages to make it through the committee,
yes,
getting it onto the order paper that takes it to the entire House is a process. If it doesn't get frustrated at the floor, if it doesn't get frustrated in the committee, it might fail to get onto the order paper. If it succeeds in getting onto the order paper, it might not pass the House debate. If it passes the House debate, Parliament only recommends to the executive. So it can be frustrated at that level. So, and that is the biggest concentration of political actors who should be, and if you say you're not getting the necessary breakthroughs at that level, where can you get them?
Of course, we can also get from, there are audits which have been demanded by the executive itself. Sometimes we get the executive coming in and requesting for the Auditor General to carry out an audit.
When it wants to give some political accountability, not actually.
Yeah, so political will does not only come from Parliament. I know we have challenges in Parliament, but also the executive itself. I think we expect support. Sometimes it comes, not all the time, but we expect support from the executive.
We've had some executive pronouncements about alleged corrupt individuals and cases, and people have been declared innocent or guilty at that level. Jane, the same question to you. Is there political will, and what is that evidence of political will to fight corruption in this country?
You know, when you earlier asked that question and you said, don't look at the agencies, don't look at the law, I thought that was not fair, because that is one of those are the parameters that we look at to say, is there political will? What is the legislative framework? What is the institutional framework? What are the public finance management systems that are being put in place, that are being refined by the executive? You know that, for example, we had the amendment of the Public Finance Management Act in 2015, which is supposed to streamline and ensure better management of public, finances. So I believe that to a great extent, we do have that political will. There are challenges, however. there are challenges. He said it earlier, that not all institutions are properly facilitated. The Criminal Investigations Department, which DPP relies on for investigation of all fraud cases, certainly needs help in terms of training, in terms of capacity building, in terms of building a specialized unit that really knows what they're looking for when they're dealing with this syndicate kind of corruption. It's the same thing with the Directorate of Public Prosecutions. Prosecuting a case takes money. And certainly we keep lobbying every year that we do need better allocations to help us execute this mandate. Because witnesses come, you must facilitate them. They must, stay in town. If the fraud is, for example, across border, you're going to incur expenses in dealing with, your mutual legal assistance requests, maybe flying a team of people to go and do these investigations, or work with the rest of the other stakeholders, sometimes not within borders. So it certainly is an expensive
I hear
venture.
you. I hear you on that. And my question is, you have a plethora of legal instruments.
Yes.
You had a fantastic Anti-Corruption Act.
Yes.
2009.
Yes.
Assented to in August 25th, I think, 2009. Then you had the new Anti-Corruption
The amendment.
The amendment, the one that was driven by the John Simbwa.
Yes.
Anti-Corruption Act. And someone steps back and looks and say, what is the problem with this? I think the country is suffering from, I'm going to use a bad word, a constipation of laws. Every problem, you're like a carpenter who looks at every problem as a nail and wants to hammer it. So every problem is another law.
Okay.
And you have a multiplicity of agencies, you have a multiplicity of laws, and the problem doesn't seem either to reduce or even go away. I mean, go away or even reduce. And you have to say, why is this investment worth it? Is it worth it to throw good money after bad money?
You know what, with the plethora of the legislation that you're talking about, especially Honorable Simbwa's amendment, the President is yet to assent. I think when it comes out, we'll look at it. It is our belief within the Directorate that the Anti-Corruption Act is a good piece of legislation, 2009, and that within it, there are a lot of opportunities or remedies for us to push ourselves from the traditional way of handling cases. The traditional way being, we take people to court, they are convicted, we say bye, we slam the doors of prison on them and we go away. Now the trend internationally is going towards make sure that the offense of corruption hurts. Do not let the accused persons or those who are involved in it benefit from it. And because this is a development, we are working there. So the issues to do with asset recovery, certainly if we haven't experienced them, as you continue to exercise or put the law into practice, you will find certain things that you could do better. For example, some jurisdictions have what they call civil recovery, even in a criminal case. I don't have to base asset recovery on the basis of a conviction.
Yes.
So those are things that we develop towards, and therefore amendments will happen.
Yes.
But I think that the law is good enough. We have used it. The number of assets that have been frozen by the Anti-Corruption Court, I don't have the figures, but they are quite numerous in cases. And now we have created what we call an asset recovery desk within the DPP's office. And we're saying the asset recovery desk is going to do things differently. Ensure that for every corruption case that we are investigating, we're not only looking for the evidence, working with the auditors or whatever, or PPDA or the police to get us the documents and the experts, but we're going to immediately investigate the assets of the persons that are involved, and where necessary, freeze them. Because what had been happening was that we were going the traditional way. We do the investigation for the crime. You go to court and say he stole 100 million shillings, and the court says yes, you've proved it, and you go to prison. Sentences the person to a jail term and says make compensation of 100 million. And then we're like, wait a minute, how are we going to recover their 100 million? We didn't bother about his assets. By that time, the assets are dissipated. So the asset recovery unit that we have created, and we have a lot of support from the World Bank, STAR, and training and that kind of stuff, we believe that we're going to see more asset recoveries. And if the law of John Simbwa is assented to by the president, which makes a mandatory, it modifies this a bit, certainly will make the asset recovery thing much better.
Just as we bring the show to an end, if you were to make a wish going into the next year, since we may not have an opportunity to have you come back into the studio before the end of the year, what would that be in terms of your work as the Director of Public Prosecution?
Increased funding to enable us to do our work. That would be, honestly, the wish that I would have for the Directorate of Public Prosecutions. As I said earlier, that the process is extremely expensive. Not just the investigative process, now we are doing prosecution-led investigations, but even disclosure. For example, you have the bicycle case, which you didn't congratulate us, we won. Yes. Yes. For example, we have 6 accused persons, and each of them has different lawyers. The document that we have, that we are going to rely on during the prosecution, and which we are entitled, actually we are obligated to provide to each accused party, could be in this size. And the obligation to disclosure, again, is on the Directorate of Public Prosecution.
I wonder, when you make a case for this support from the public especially,
yes,
and asset recovery and yes, finding, if you ask anybody on the street, someone used to joke that if you ask buildings to name their owners, or properties to name their owners, they would. But if you go through the asset register at the register at the Uganda Bureau of Registration Services Bureau, you'll not find that evidence, because people know how to hide their wealth. Let me put a different question to you, because we have, I think, about a minute to get out of here.
Yes.
There's been some argument that actually going through this making corruption hard. We've gone through the motions and people have hardened against corruption. They become smarter. Bank of Uganda put a limit. Any payment above 20 million must go through telegraphic transfer. You can't write a check. And someone was asking, if I write 3 checks of 18 million, 19 million, and I write another one, 3 checks, can't I go above the limit? What are the consequences? And the question is...
There are consequences, because then we know that you're trying to avoid getting to the limit. I mean, we will study the trend of the transaction.
The question is, there's been some argument that says corruption over and its own actually doesn't hinder development. But maybe find a different way. There's something that's been called philanthropic corruption, where beneficiaries of corrupt money put it some good use.
Like Robin Hood, you mean?
Yes, modern day Robin Hood.
Okay.
Is that an argument? I don't know what your view about that kind of argument is.
I disagree. When you look at the amounts of money that are involved, for example, OPM, this was Peace and Recovery Development Funds for Northern Uganda. Or we're looking at a global fund for fighting HIV and tuberculosis, or immunization, that is Gavi. Surely, when you look at the amount of money lost, how can we say that people actually do benefit? The ones that are expected to get the service.
Francis,
I disagree.
Francis, let me put the same question to you. Are there different ways you think the fight against corruption can be handled? Apart from prosecute, jail, now recover, stuff like that. Is there?
Well, I cannot say that we need to find other ways. I think all we need to do is to make these ways, the systems work. I think we have good systems in place. All we need to do is to make them work.
What do you need to do to make them work?
You've talked about will, political will. You asked a question about my wish. The wish, I would wish that Parliament was able to discuss all that goes to it within the 6 months. They allowed 6 months. And that also the executive takes action on the recommendations of Parliament. And that would also make the prosecution process much easier.
There's a friend of mine whom I know should be watching this show, and he said, but Charles, those things of yours, you go and discuss and talk, and it doesn't reach anywhere. I imagine he's watching and he will be asking, he says, Charles, but those things of yours, how far can they go? But one thing we can't stop doing is keep the debate and keep the discussion. And hopefully you can no longer shame people. I think anti-corruption did a name and shame only once and do it again. Thank you very much, Jane Okuo Kajuga, for making time for the show.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
And thank you very much, Francis Masubo, for making time for the show.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much to you all our viewers for joining us tonight. Do join us again next Sunday for another exciting discussion right here on the Fourth Estate. I think we'll be hitting back on the campaign trail to follow, the politics and the promises, especially in light of fighting corruption. Everybody wants to promise they'll fight corruption. Why they don't actually do fight it, I do not know. Maybe we'll be looking at that on the next show and following the politics and where they are. Have a good night.